Hi, folks. Welcome to Your Quality of Life Healthy Alternatives. I'm Dr. Christine Sauer, and I'm extremely happy to have Bill Straubinger with me. Do I pronounce it right, Bill?
Oh, your pronunciation was great.
That was a German pronunciation. Don't say Straubinger, we say Straubinger.
Straubinger.
It's a German name in a way.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you're the president of Results for Change. You help organizations by giving their employees the tools to make better decisions, solve problems, and improve their results.
Yes.
Who doesn't need it?
That's right.
Tell me about how did you get into that profession? Why are you so interested in problem solving?
Right. Well, interestingly, I got to it from a circuitous route. I started my career on Wall Street actually, and got involved in the Big Brother program, and then ended up running a nonprofit for a good number of years, about 18 years. I ran a nonprofit called the Volunteer Center, and I did a lot of training at the Volunteer Center, training nonprofit agencies, other people. And so I started my own business, consulting, coaching, training, um, probably almost 20 years ago. And one of the first things I did was to take on the American Management Association as a client. And I did a number of things for them. And again, one of the things I got involved in through them was critical thinking. So I've been doing things like critical thinking, decision making for them. And over the years, I put together my own problem solving uh, model. And that's what I ended up writing my book about, the 6-step problem solving model, where I kind of combined critical thinking or an enhanced version of that with problem solving.
And that is really fascinating because critical thinking, and as a brain health professional, I know that it's in the prefrontal cortex.
Mhm.
So you need a really complex method that includes physical and mental and other issues to have really a complex problem solving issue. So tell me about what does it take to become an essential problem solver?
Well, it takes a number of things, but one of the things I want to also make clear is the critical thinking part is important, the logical, analytical piece. But I really believe in whole brain thinking. So I think, as you're alluding to, there's left brain thinking, right brain thinking. And what you want to do is you don't want to ignore the right brain, what people feel about something, because how they feel about it, positively and negatively, will really decide how much energy they're going to put into it, or if they're really
Mhm.
even if they're going to get involved in it at all. So I like whole brain thinking.
Has to do with the motivation, of course.
Yes,
Yeah, absolutely, because people are motivated by emotion, not by the analytical thinking.
that's right. That's right.
Fascinating, fascinating. So, what does it take to solve your problems?
Well, again, just as you were saying, to be an essential problem solver, what you want to do first of all is have an open mind.
Mm.
And can we always be open minded? Probably not. So, what you want to do is catch yourself when you are being closed minded, because that's going to stop you from really looking at other possibilities.
Mm.
So, that's one thing that you really want to make sure. The other thing
How
you
do
want
you
to make
do that?
how do you do that? By, again, usually if you can catch yourself being closed minded, in other
How
words,
do you
not
how do you
listening.
catch yourself being closed-minded? How do you know that? Because usually we don't. We say, "Oh no, we always knew
Yeah.
that."
It's interesting just because what you said was the basic question. How do you know that? So when you're thinking something, what you want to say is, how do I know that? Or if you're with a group, how do we know that? And then you'll catch yourself, well, we know that because we've had past experiences that turned out like that.
Mhm.
Yes, but this is a different situation. And I think that's really a key component too, is to really understand that there are no two situations that are exactly the same.
Yeah.
Even if the situation is happening again, it's going to be different because it's happening at a different time. So what you want to say is, what can I learn from past experiences? But then what's new about this experience that I need to take into consideration?
I love that approach. And as a doctor, of course, I look at the history of medicine and how stubborn the medical system was to adopt new practices in the past, like hygiene. It is fascinating. So
Yeah.
they did not recognize that they were close minded. So I love that step. It's so important.
Yeah. Another challenge is people usually go to the same sources for information all the time. And they hang around with people and they look up information that agrees with what they believe is true.
Mhm.
So one of the things, if you're going to be a essential problem solver, is you want to look for what we call disconfirming evidence.
Mhm.
You want to look at what the other side thinks and feels about it, and what information are they using. Because a lot of times, if we're just looking for confirming information, it's like in the United States, are you watching Fox News or are you watching MSNBC? Because if you're watching either one of those, you're getting one side and that's it. So you want to make sure that you're looking for that disconfirming evidence for that other side.
Yeah, it's interesting because as an MD and ND, I'm basically on two sides of the same thing. Here in North America, it's hard to combine it, but the truth is always in the middle. And you're right, you have to look at both sides. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah.
Good point.
And the third thing really is point of view.
Mhm.
We all have our own point of view.
Mhm.
So we come at something, with and a point of view could be anything from the job you have. You might be looking, if you're an IT person, you're looking at a problem differently than if you're a human resource person. That would be a different point of view. But also there are styles that we have. And you're probably familiar with Myers-Briggs and DISC and some of those assessments.
Mhm.
Well, they're great because they'll tell you kind of where your strengths lie and also where your weaknesses lie. So if you're looking at something and you're a pretty detail-oriented person, that's one point of view. Another point of view might be a big picture point of view. And then how does somebody look at that, differently than you are? So point of view is another important. And an example I always use is bicycle lanes. I was working with New York City Department of Transportation on bicycle lanes. And when they looked at that problem, they had to take into consideration all sorts of different points of view. The business owners looking at it as an impediment, taking away their parking, pedestrians looking at it as being dangerous, and just the bicyclers themselves looking at it as something they needed to have happen. So they looked at 6 or 7 different points of view, but you
Yeah,
need to consider all of those different points of view before you make a decision.
that is so true. So what's the next step?
Well, the next step, once you feel comfortable, and especially with point of view, you want to get a couple of other people to work with you. You want to put together a good team of people. Now, sometimes you can't do that, but a lot of times you can. So when you're doing the problem solving, one of the key parts is this first part, which is what we call develop awareness.
Mhm.
So by developing awareness, you're going to look at the particular issue, problem, challenge that you have from all different aspects. And what you want to look at is inside the situation and also outside the situation.
Yeah,
And that's key because there could be other elements outside of the situation that could be affecting the way you're looking at your situation, or your situation, the way it plays out. So developing awareness is a key point. And you do that with a group of people, take a certain amount of time. And one of the key parts in my 6-step problem solving is the middle part. And the middle part is stop and think. Stop and think. And this is what you need to do throughout all the steps. You need to stop and think, because a lot of times we go for what we think is the answer and we proceed with that without really checking it out. And so we end up with not a great solution.
Mhm.
So after you develop some awareness and get other people that even might not be involved in your situation, don't know about it, they'll come up with different ways of looking at it and different questions to ask you about it.
Yeah,
So after you develop awareness, the next part is defining the problem. And again, not so easy. We might think it's easy. We might think we know what the definition of the problem is. But by looking at it from again, different perspectives, we'll come up with different ways of defining the problem. An example I can give you of that is one of the people in one of my trainings was in charge of 30 different stores around the country.
right.
And her job was to have the managers of these stores pass this particular test each year. And they hated it. It was like pulling teeth. Oh, here she comes again with this test, right? So her question initially was, how do I get these managers to pass this test? So that was a legitimate question. When we kicked it around in our group, another person came up with, how do we make these tests something that's of value to the managers?
Right.
Same question, whole different way of looking at it. So, and it really helped her expand her view of what she was trying to do.
Yeah.
So that was
Awesome.
a key thing. And sometimes defining the problem takes you, 50% of the whole time.
Mhm.
So you got to really try and get away from the symptom of the problem and really find out what the problem is.
And that's a key point, because when I look at it from a standpoint of mental health, and then now it's a little bit of outside of your expertise, but it's interesting to me. People have problems and they have different options, and they often only look at their own problems as, oh my God, there's nothing I can do. I'm the victim and there's nothing I can do. But how do they recognize that they have a problem that can be solved? And how do you motivate somebody to start solving a problem?
It's a good question. I think by showing them that there are different ways to approach it, and that's really you're leading right into number three, which is exploring the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I put in some of the critical thinking pieces. So it's a four-step problem, actually. I call it the four C's. The first one is you want to collect information.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to look at what's the information I have, and then what information do I need? Now, sometimes you're going to find that the information you need might not be available, or if it's available, it may not be credible. So you have to take all of these things into consideration. So you don't want to get too much information, but you want to get just enough information. It's like the three bears, right? You need just enough, and don't overload yourself with information that's extraneous. So in collecting information, that first part, then you're going to look at the information is, again, credible, verifiable. The second part is from this information, from what you know, what are some assumptions that you could make?
Yeah.
So, and again, assumptions are basically what do you believe is true? So when you look at what you believe is true, then you're going to look at what's the evidence for that. Now, sometimes you're going to have evidence, sometimes you're not going to have evidence. But again, either way, you're going to weigh that in making your decisions along the way. So if you assume that, so I assume that companies are going to buy my training. Now, why am I assuming that? Because in the past, they have bought some of my training. So from the assumption, evidence, then you come up with a conclusion. So
Yeah.
the conclusion you reach, it's important. But after the conclusion is also another part to the conclusion. So, what's an implication or consequence of that conclusion? And so, what you have to do is one at a time. You look at assumption, what's the evidence, what's the conclusion you could draw, and what are the consequences and implications of that. And so, if you do that with each assumption, that's where you'll logically come up with an end result on that. So that's the second one, clarifying and confirming what your assumptions are. The last one, which is equally important, is you want to look at different points of view. So we want to what I call the other C is consider other points of view. So what other points of view do you need to consider while you're looking at this? And a lot of times it could be your boss's point of view, it could be the customer's point of view, it could be some of the other employees and your team's point of view. And again, this really, if you consider your boss's point of view and you really can think that your boss doesn't know anything about this, or your boss might have a negative view of this, that's going to point you in a direction when you move to the next step, which is then generating, analyzing, and selecting options. So you're
Mm.
going to do all of this work in exploring options before you generate the options. So at this point, you're going to generate some really well thought out options.
Wow, that is fascinating. So first you have to really do all the work before you start jumping to conclusions and taking action in a
That's
certain way.
right. That's right.
Yeah. So
And so, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
So now when you get to, number four of generating, analyzing, and selecting options, the options that you're going to generate are going to be really, well, again, as I said, well thought out. And what you want to do is use some sort of brainstorming technique, whether that's brainstorming or brain writing, or whatever technique you can get to have people think outside of the box.
Yeah.
And you want to get different kinds of solutions. The next part of analyzing them, that's where you're going to have some criteria that you want to use for analyzing, for selecting the option. So what's the criteria? It might be financial criteria, it might be time, it might be, the different aspects of what you need to use for the selection.
Yeah.
And then the final selection is going to end up the really interesting thing here is if you're doing it with a group of people, which again, I suggest that you do that with, they'll press you. If you're picking out a solution that you like because it's easy, because it's something you want to do, no, that's not it. It's got to be the best selection. And again, two of the main criteria points is it's got to be doable and it's going to give you the biggest bang for the buck. So the amount of resources you're going to put in, you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck back.
So would you say a good team is one that does not necessarily agree with what you're saying all the time?
Definitely. And I think having a devil's advocate is helpful.
Yes.
And if you don't have a devil's advocate, create one. Give somebody that role to be the devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always helpful because they'll, again, bring in information opposed to what you think is the best way to do it. So that's always a good thing. Then the next one is kind of where the rubber meets the road. After you make a selection of a solution, now you're going to plan it. So what you want to do is you want to do the simple, who, what, when, where. And this is where you're going to try and involve people up front. They're going to play an important role in the solution being laid out. So many times what you're going to find is that you're not the right person to implement the solution because you may not have enough power, you may be in the wrong place, or you just may need people who have different kinds of expertise than you have to help you get it done. So this is where when you do the what's first, what's second, you may involve people in your plan that you need to have help you make it happen. And then, of course, the last part, review and assess progress, key part. So how are you going to review progress? Because we don't always pick the right solution or things will come up that we hadn't thought of. Yeah. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're having a way to review what's going on. And I'd say sooner than later. Sometimes there's a natural time to review. You need to get permission, you need to get funding, something has to happen. That would be a natural time to review. If you don't have that, what you would need to do is set a review date sooner than later, earlier on, maybe 2 weeks in, and say, how's everything going? And then you can make some course corrections if you need to do that. Mm-hmm. And then the next part is really, how are we going to collect learnings? Because there's always learnings, whether it's working out great or it's not working out. So you want to find a way to collect learnings because then the next time you're going to use those learnings to help you do an even better job. Now, another aspect of my particular model is, and you'll see from the model, there are arrows pointing into all of the steps. So you may find that your solution that you picked is not working out. That's when you need to say, okay, what did we learn? And let's re-enter the problem-solving model where we need to, whether it's awareness again, or just picking out another solution, whatever you need, wherever you need to enter it, you enter it again and then go through the process. Because what you want to do is solve the problem.
Yeah. And that's a really well thought through analytical process that people need to apply, not just in business, but maybe even for life's problems.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, when I love life's problems, of course, as a coach, how do you recognize that that a particular problem is a problem that can be solved? Because there's problems in this world that we don't solve as individuals. There's just no way. I can't solve the problem that I find electricity too expensive. Hey.
Right. Right. So what I would do is I'd ask you, so what makes you think there's a solution to your problem?
Right.
And so, and that's what I always tell people, look, come in with something that you think has a solution to it. You don't have to come up with the solution. I don't want you to come up with the solution, but it's got to be solvable. If I come up with the problem, I need to raise $1 million by the end of the week.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, so what makes you think you could do that?
Yeah.
Now, if you want to change that to how can I raise as much money as possible by the end of the week, now we're talking about something that's doable.
So really, as a coach, you would take the people that come to you with a problem that seems unsolvable, like I want to raise $1 million in a week, and guide them to transforming it into a problem that is solvable.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Like when somebody comes to me and is extremely depressed and they say, well, I'll never be happy again, which is a thinking distortion,
Sure.
obviously,
Yeah,
or an unsolvable problem. Because if they think I'll never be happy again, they're right.
that's right. And that's what you have. When I ask people, come in with a problem that you think can be solved.
Yeah. That's good. So transform your unsolvable problem in something that can be solved.
Right.
Like I will be working this week on this step to get a little bit happier, for
That's
example.
right.
Yeah, I love that. Or as much money as I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a much more positive view of things. I love that. That positive view of come with a problem that you can solve. Hmm.
And that's why I tell people when they get involved with my program, I say, look, I'm not guaranteeing I'm going to solve your problem. I am guaranteeing that you'll come up with another solution that you had not have thought of.
Hey,
So that is what we can tell you. You are going to come up with another solution that you had not, but it's up to you to work on that solution
right.
to make it happen. And
That's a
sometimes it
good
takes a
point.
while.
Oh, of course. Now, a question for you about priorities. If people have 20 problems, how do they prioritize which one to solve first? Say there are 20 problems, they are all solvable in some way.
I would say, what's the one that's really holding you back? What's the key problem that if you solved it, you would be able to look at these other problems in a better way? So, what's the key problem for you right now that's stopping you from moving forward? And I kind of take it that way because again, there are a lot of one, two, three, four. There's different ways of handling each one of those problems, and different criteria for which ones are important or less important.
Mm. And that's an awesome way of looking at it. And I love your wisdom and expertise in that area. So, what would your take be on life's problem as a problem solver?
I think that's a good question. And life problems are really a key to other problems because if you don't feel good about yourself, and that's why I say to be an essential problem solver, you really need to look at yourself and you need to have some of those characteristics. If you're going to come in and say, I can't solve this problem, it'll never happen. If you're going to come in with a negative attitude, that's not going to be very helpful. So if you're trying to solve life's problems, the first thing you have to do is try and be confident that you can have some sort of impact on the problem. Because as you were kind of alluding to before, if you're coming into it saying, I can never, I'm depressed, I can't do anything, I can never, then, it's going to be very hard for you to move forward.
Yeah.
So I think people have to have at least a positive attitude that you can affect it in some way.
In your experience, what is the best way to transform a negative attitude into a positive attitude?
Well, again, a good question. I would just kind of sit down with them and say, so when's a time when you thought you couldn't do something and found that you could? So
Yeah.
when's a time when you were stuck and you felt you could never move forward and you made some little progress? There was some little thing that you did to move forward and try and build on that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a good way to do it.
And I like that. And I sometimes think people have to make a decision not to stay the way they are, but to improve their own life and their situation. And that includes problem solving.
Yes.
And it's the same for a corporation or a business. They have to decide, I'm not happy with the space I'm in. I want to improve my business.
Yeah. And the thing with business and the thing that's running me right now with my business is I want to work with people who want to really do something.
Yeah.
So I don't want to come in and just go through my problem solving method and so long. I want people that want to solve their problem, are willing to
Mhm.
put in the resources and energy into solving the problem. And I want to help them do that.
Yeah.
So it's not just giving them a tool and saying so long. I want to really help them solve that problem.
Now, there's two things that I want you to talk about before we wrap that up. For one, you wrote an awesome book that for people that just want the method, that's probably the way to go. It's cheap, it's there, and they can see what really the method is. And I'll share that, of course, where that podcast and video will be. And secondly, how do people best contact you if they're interested in exploring how it would be to work with you?
Well, you can either contact me on LinkedIn, and even on LinkedIn, there's a little blurb in the experience part where it goes through the 6 steps. So you get a little chance of that. You can also email me at resultsforchange@verizon.net. And if you do that and you ask me for the introduction part of my book, I'm happy to send it to you. I'll send you a PDF which will go through the 6 steps, which will explain the 6 steps. So if somebody wants to, again, email me at resultsforchange, all one word, at verizon.net and ask me for the introduction, I'm happy to send it to them.
And I will put that right under the video so people can absolutely do that.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. This was a very interesting and fascinating conversation.
Good.
And I'm so happy that I met you.
Me too. I'm happy I met you. And thank you so much, Christine. Appreciate it.
Thank you.